The cell was small, the walls damp and unyielding, the air heavy with silence. For most men, it would have been a grave, a place where hope withers and the human spirit bends until it breaks. But for Nelson Mandela, that cell became the forge of destiny. For 27 years, he lived behind bars, stripped of freedom, stripped of family, stripped of the life he once knew. And yet, when he finally walked out, he did not emerge broken. He emerged unshakable, ready to lead a nation that had once tried to bury him. This is the story of a man who turned pain into power, who transformed suffering into strength, who carried the weight of a people on his shoulders and refused to let it crush him. He was born Rolihlahla in 1918, in the rolling hills of the Transkei, a boy whose very name meant troublemaker. He grew up herding cattle, listening to the stories of warriors who had resisted colonial rule, and from an early age, he understood that his people lived under a shadow. His father's death sent him to live with the Thembu royal family, where he was exposed to leadership and tradition, where he learned that one man could shape the destiny of many. At school, a teacher gave him a new name, Nelson, a colonial label meant to erase his identity. It was a small act, but it symbolized the larger injustice he would spend his life fighting. Mandela excelled in school, eventually attending the University of Fort Hare, where he was introduced to politics and the winds of change sweeping across the world. In Johannesburg, he saw apartheid in its rawest form. Passed laws that dictated where black South Africans could walk, work, or live. Police brutality that crushed dissent. Poverty enforced by design. He joined the African National Congress, a movement that sought to challenge apartheid through petitions, protests, and strikes. He became a rising star, tall, charismatic, eloquent, with a fire in his eyes that inspired those around him. But peaceful protest was met with bullets. Demonstrations ended in massacres, and Mandela and his comrades realized that words alone would not topple apartheid. In 1961, he co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, the Spear of the Nation, the armed wing of the ANC. They carried out acts of sabotage against government infrastructure, targeting power stations, railways, and military installations. Mandela became a wanted man, hunted by the state, forced to live underground, moving from safe house to safe house. The press called him the Black Pimpernel, a man who could vanish and reappear at will. But in 1962, his luck ran out. He was captured, tried, and sentenced to life in prison. At the Rivonia trial, he stood before the court and declared that he cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society, an ideal for which he was prepared to die. With those words, he was led away in chains. He was 46 years old. He would not see freedom again for 27 years. Robben Island was more than a prison. It was a machine designed to crush the human spirit. Each morning began before dawn. Prisoners marched to the limestone quarries where they hacked at stone under the blazing sun. The glare burned Mandela's eyes, leaving them permanently damaged. Meals Emails were meager, letters from family censored, visits rare and heavily monitored. His cell was barely larger than a closet, a thin mat on the floor, a bucket in the corner. Yet Mandela refused to be broken. He studied law, mentored younger prisoners, turned his cell into a classroom, his suffering into wisdom. He insisted on dignity, demanded that prisoners stand tall even when guards tried to humiliate them. Slowly, even the guards began to change. They had been trained to see him as a terrorist, but in his calm voice and steady gaze they saw something else. A leader. Outside the prison walls, the world began to change. The struggle against apartheid grew louder. Students rose up in Soweto in 1976, protesting against Afrikaans-only education. Police opened fire, killing children, and the images shocked the world. International pressure mounted. Countries imposed sanctions. Companies pulled investments. The apartheid government found itself increasingly isolated. And through it all, Mandela remained behind bars. His absence only magnified his presence. He became a myth, a symbol larger than life. But he was not just waiting, he was preparing. The fiery young revolutionary who had once embraced sabotage became a patient strategist, a statesman in waiting. He realized that South Africa's future would not be won by violence alone. It would require negotiation, compromise, and reconciliation. While Mandela endured prison, his family bore their own suffering. His wife, Winnie Mandela, became the face of resistance on the outside. Harassed, arrested, vilified, yet carrying his name like a banner. His children grew up without him. He missed their birthdays, their graduations, their lives. The cost of his struggle was not just his freedom, but the intimacy of family. This was the hidden pain of Mandela's sacrifice. The world saw the hero. His children saw the absence. By the late 1980s, South Africa was crumbling. The economy was in crisis. International sanctions bit deep, the streets filled with protests, strikes, and violence. The apartheid government could no longer hold back the tide. Secret talks began. Government officials met with Mandela in private, expecting bitterness, anger, demands for revenge. Instead, they found a man calm, measured, willing to talk of peace. Mandela had spent 27 years in prison, but he had not wasted them. He had prepared himself to lead. In 1989, F.W. de Klerk became president of South Africa. He knew the system could not survive. On February 11th, 1990, the world watched as Nelson Mandela walked out of Victor Verster prison. He was older now, his hair gray, his step slower, but his fist was raised high, his spirit unbroken. The crowd roared, the cameras flashed, the world held its breath. Mandela was free, but freedom was not the end of his struggle. Was the beginning of his greatest test. When Nelson Mandela walked out of Victor Verster prison on that February day in 1990, the world erupted in celebration. Crowds surged forward, fists raised, tears streaming down faces that had waited decades for this moment. The cameras captured an older man, his hair gray, his step slower, but his spirit unbroken. He raised his fist high, and in that gesture was the promise of a new South Africa. Yet freedom was not the end of his struggle. It was the beginning of his greatest test. The nation he returned to was a powder keg. Decades of apartheid had left scars that ran deep. Townships were burning, police clashed with protesters, and violence between rival factions threatened to plunge the country into civil war. Mandela could have chosen revenge. He could have unleashed the anger of millions who had suffered under apartheid. Instead, he chose reconciliation. He spoke not of vengeance, but of unity. He called on his people to lay down their weapons, to build a nation together, black and white, oppressor and oppressed. Negotiations with President F.W. de Klerk began. They were tense, fragile, often on the brink of collapse. Hardliners on both sides resisted. Blood was spilled in the streets, massacres carried out by those who feared change. But Mandela held firm. He knew that South Africa's future could not be built on hatred. He met his enemies face to face, shook the hands of those who had once jailed him, and spoke of peace with a conviction that silenced even his critics. In 1993, Mandela and de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The world recognized what they were attempting: to dismantle one of the most brutal systems of oppression without plunging the nation into chaos. And then, in 1994, history was made. For the first time in South Africa's history, all citizens, black and white, were allowed to vote. Millions lined up for hours, some for days, to cast their ballots. Old men and women who had lived their entire lives under apartheid wept as they placed their votes. And when the ballots were counted, Nelson Mandela was elected the first black president of South Africa. The inauguration was a moment the world will never forget. Standing before a sea of people, Mandela declared that never again would South Africa be the skunk of the world. Never again would one race dominate another. He spoke of forgiveness, of healing, of a rainbow nation. And yet, he knew that words alone could not erase centuries of pain. The real work was just beginning. As President Mandela faced enormous challenges, the economy was fragile, inequality vast, and mistrust between communities deep. He launched the Truth and Reconciliation Commission led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu to confront the crimes of the past. Victims of apartheid told their stories. Perpetrators confessed their sins, and the nation was forced to look into the mirror of its own brutality. It was painful, raw, and imperfect, but it was a step toward healing. Mandela believed that true power was not domination, but forgiveness. He also understood the power of symbols. In 1995, during the Rugby World Cup hosted in South Africa, Mandela donned the green jersey of the Springboks, once a hated symbol of white supremacy. When he walked onto the field to present the trophy to the team's captain, the stadium erupted in chants of "Nelson, Nelson." It was a moment that transcended sport. It was a moment that showed a divided nation that unity was possible. But Mandela's presidency was not without cost. Years of imprisonment had taken a toll on his health. His family life remained fractured, the years of absence leaving wounds that could not be healed. He served only one term, stepping down in 1999, believing that leadership was about service, not power. He left behind a fragile democracy, but also a legacy that would inspire the world. In his later years, Mandela became a global elder statesman, a voice for peace and justice. He spoke out against poverty, against HIV/AIDS, against war. He was revered not just as a leader, but as a moral compass. Yet even as the world celebrated him, he remained humble. He often reminded people that he was not a saint, that he was a man who had made mistakes, who had struggled, who had simply refused to give up. The cost of his journey was immense, 27 years stolen from his life, a family he could not see grow, a body weakened by labor and age. But the power he gained was greater still. He showed the world the true strength lies not in revenge, but in forgiveness. That pain can be transformed into power. That one man, armed with conviction, can change the course of history. When Nelson Mandela passed away in 2013, the world mourned as if it had lost a father. Leaders from every nation gathered to honor him. Millions wept, not just in South Africa, but across the globe. His life had become more than a story of one man. It had become a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. From a boy named Roli Lahla, the troublemaker, to a prisoner in a tiny cell, to the president of a free nation, Mandela's journey was the embodiment of pain turned into power. He once said, "I never lose. I either win or learn." And in those words lies the essence of his life. He endured suffering, he embraced struggle, and he emerged not with bitterness, but with wisdom. This is the legacy of Nelson Mandela, a man who walked into darkness for 27 years and emerged carrying the light of a nation. A man who showed the world that forgiveness is the greatest weapon of all. A man who proved that even the deepest pain can be transformed into the most enduring power.